Great, great. Thank you. So, friends, welcome to our distinguished lecture series talk today. It's by a dear friend, Anurag Saxena ji, but he's not just a dear friend, he's one of the smartest people I know, and also a lot of fun to be with. There's never a dull moment. You can spend hours and, there's so many things to talk about. But, behind the facade of someone who's not just smart and happy-go-lucky. There is a very determined individual, okay, who has understood the way the world works and wants to make a difference, and a positive difference, I would say. Now, I'll just introduce his project in a moment, but a few words about him. He's a chartered accountant. He's an MBA from an IIM in India, and he's had a very distinguished career before he went full time to do things that are important to him. Of course, he's an investor, so he spends, I suppose, a fraction of his time to make sure that everything is good in terms of his own, situation. He's Singapore-based, and he's in a way now, Anurag, you don't have to hear all this, but he's an international celebrity. He has appeared on on BBC. He's published in Washington Post, in the he's been all over the world virtually, and really to bring this cause forward. I'll talk about the cause in a moment. And that is what is more interesting to me, as not just as an academic, but as somebody who studies narrative, is that Anurag ji is able to convince people on all sides of the ideological and political spectrum about the justness of his cause. Now, this speaks not just about the cause, because there are many causes which are just, but it also speaks about his finesse in the way he presents his cause. Now, he will speak about his cause, but I will only mention a few broad things. Many years ago, when I was still a student in the United States, I happened to go to one of the top museums in America. And I paused before a beautiful image of a Ganesha, and I saw that the kumkum and the turmeric on the idol were fresh. By fresh, I mean, if you touched them, they would come off. That means they were a few weeks or a few months old. And there was somebody taking, us around on a tour. If you if you go to one of these museums, even the Smithsonian, there are these tours. So you can sign up for a tour. See, 11 o'clock, there's a tour of the Indian, exhibits. And I asked the lady, I said, this image has been freshly worshipped. And she said, really? She said, how do you know that? I said, look at the marks on it, It's not like this image was worshipped like 200 years ago. No, the marks are reasonably fresh. And of course, I can't touch it. But and then it said, acquired by the museum, blah, 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 from Sotheby's or some house, some auction house, whatever. And that acquisition date was just a few months prior. So what got me thinking is, how was an image worshipped just a few months ago, now in a museum in the States? What was the process? And then, as one talked to people, one began to realize there's a huge nexus. There's several abandoned temples in India. Just Tamil Nadu has almost 30,000 temples, which are in a very sad state. Some of these temples are under the local archaeological survey or the national ASI or several other bodies. And not just Tamil Nadu, all over India. You go to Orcha, which is under the Madhya Pradesh Archaeological Survey. People are playing cricket inside monuments. There are buffaloes near Shivalingas, and several monuments have been occupied. Okay, even in Delhi. So it's so easy, to pick up a stone and to pick up an image, to pick up some artifact, and there's a huge black market where these can be traded. Even today, after so much awareness. And of course, as they say, the dash, 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 dash hit the ceiling when a prominent RDer in the US, whose name we can say because I think he's still under investigation, Mr. Subhash Kapoor, I think, with links with the high and mighty of the land, was apprehended for antique thefts. Now, there are rules, there are laws all over, there are UNESCO conventions, and I'm sure Anuragji will brief us about them, which can protect, the trade in these artifacts. And yet, as we speak, artifacts are being stolen and shipped abroad. Okay. Now, Anuragji has had some tremendous successes, and you need the cooperation of several government agencies and the host country as well. And we've succeeded, and the PM himself has taken a lot of interest in bringing our gods back home. And this is one cause in which left, right, center, everybody wants to stand for this. Okay. And Anuragji will again, explain to us his methodology, his way of approaching this problem, which I think is really unique and it's very important. And the other thing I wanted to say, just to flip the coin, to be the devil's advocate, so to speak, another experience, you go to the Art Institute in Chicago, or you go to a great museum like the Met, or even in England, you'll see a lot of Tibetan artifacts, okay? And there are places where an entire shrine has been reconstructed. And of course, for Egypt, this has been done almost pervasively. In the Pergamon, in Berlin, in all kinds of museums, you'll have a whole pyramid or the interior of a burial chamber reconstructed. Why am I saying I'm playing the devil's advocate? I'm saying this because there are civilizations and cultures which are, totally, utterly destroyed. So at least there's a place where they have been kept for the people of the world to see. So that's the other side of the coin. That ultimately this is the heritage of humanity. I'm not a chauvinist. There is just one human culture, and we are all custodians of it. Okay, so this is the other side of it. That rather than it being completely wasted and never found, perhaps if there is a stable place where it's kept for the time being, even the Elgin marbles, there's a struggle to return them to Athens. I'm sure Anuragji will bring up all these aspects. And finally, the topic, decolonization. Dharampalji used to famously say, quoting Gandhiji, in fact, that decolonization is a lengthy process because there is a thing called the half-life of colonization. And we have really reached that. 75. India at 75, I think it's a really, really important cusp for us. Because if you consider colonization in the last phase, 150 years of British rule, it's like a toxin inside a civilization's body. And वो जहर निकलते निकलते, there's a half-life. So half of it we are reaching, 75 years. And now is the time to aggressively, I think, get back, what is ours. Because decolonization happens in the mind first. And then physically, as he said, one object at a time, you can retrieve your heritage. And, for me, Anuragji is a hero. Because without government backing, he and his friends, Mr. Kumar, they started the India Pride project. He'll tell you about that. These are people, they're not sarkari damads, like us. They are not paid by the state or by an NGO, you know, let alone by some billionaire sitting somewhere trying to disrupt through remote control, societies and economies somewhere else. No, these people are self-motivated, and that's what makes them effective and nimble, in today's world. So with those words, I take great pride and pleasure in welcoming Anuragji. All yours.
Well, Makranji, it is such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for everybody that's joined in. Clearly each of us could have been elsewhere, and each of you have taken a decision to be here instead. So I'd really like to thank you. Apart from whatever I need to say today, I'm really happy that Emily has joined us. Emily works with a dear colleague of mine, Alex Herman, with the Institute of Art and Law in London, and they are now really trying to understand the idea of understand the perspective of decolonization or heritage. Hi, Emily. Good to see you here. so it's very important. I think the collective job that...
Welcome, Ms. Gould. Thank you for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you. Sorry, I was struggling to unmute myself. Thank you. It's very good to be here. And Alex sends his apologies, but it's kind of in the middle of the night for him, so I'm sure he'll catch up on the video.
Yeah. In fact, I'll make sure he views it, and then I'll make sure we all get on a call again for the report you guys are making for the British government.
Great,
So,
thank you.
There is a follow-up to this. There's a reason we are all here. But yeah, what I'd like us to do really is focus a lot on the interactive conversation that I'd like to have after the presentation. And I'd like, and in exactly the direction you went in, Makranji, for Emily or for anyone who watches this video later, to understand the perspective, the thoughts, the feelings, the hurt, the angst of a civilization that has been plundered, that has been stolen. And I think that's very important in what we're trying to do. So thank you all for having me here. I am going to try getting my presentation up. Okay, do let me know if you can see a PowerPoint on your screens. If anyone can just confirm they can see the PowerPoint on your screens, please.
Yes.
Okay. So really the format I'd like for today is to spend 20 or 25 minutes talking through the idea of decolonization and why the decolonization through objects is important. Now, over the years, India Pride Project, or the whole idea of restitution, has grown large enough to need multiple conversations like these. So I'm happy to answer questions, jot down your thoughts after the limited presentation I'm going to make. Now, again, I am aware that I'm talking, pretty much everyone on this call is more astute, more qualified, has more cerebral capacity than I do. All of you are PhDs and what have you. So I'm going to, just talk about 3 or 4 stories instead of intellectualizing the whole idea of what we do. The first story is of this dapper gentleman here, Lord William Bentinck, the Governor General, around the time we were colonized very early on. Now, true to the story of any colonization, his job was to essentially enrich the coffers, of the Crown of England, and he did a fairly good job with that. Ritika ji, can you confirm that what you see is full screen for everyone, or in a corner?
Yes, sir.
Okay, perfect. Now, what this gentleman tried, and he was quite jugadu and innovative for his own time. When he wasn't hitting his revenue targets, he did what every self-respecting colonizer would do. He tried to sell off the Taj Mahal. And I'd like you guys to go and check out the historical records of the British themselves. But guess what? When he wasn't able to successfully sell off the Taj Mahal, he moved a few miles west to the Agra fort and actually sold off all the marble from the Agra fort, which is why now you see red sandstone where marble existed. And he melted the Great Gun, which was the biggest cannon of its time across the world. So there was this thing called the Great Gun. He melted it and sold off, the iron and copper and whatever he got from it. And that, for me, summarizes the story of colonization, right? Which is, you had people coming in, taking our lives, taking our resources, and taking our heritage. And this is not unique to the UK as an aggressor. This is not unique to India as a victim. This was a totally acceptable, legit global phenomena till not very long back. Now, the whole idea of India Pride Project is very simply this. You cannot give our lives back. You cannot give our resources back. The least you can do as a gesture of goodwill, as a gesture of atoning for the sins of your forefathers, is to give back the heritage that you took from us. Now, again, Makaranji, because he's a friend, he knows I'm quite a filmy kind of a guy, as we call it in India. And I'm going to talk to you about, Indiana Jones and Robert Langdon and these archetypes and what they have meant in terms of the way the West looks at, please notice they're all white and they're all men. And there's a reason they're all white and they're all men, right? Because at some deeper psychological level, whenever you need to legitimize something that would otherwise be considered illegit, if I walked into your home and took your pots and pans away or stole your TV or your phone, there'd be no question that I was doing something that was fundamentally immoral, legality aside. But when you make a swashbuckling Harrison Ford, do it with style, it suddenly becomes legit, right? What India Pride Project is fighting is not just the research, not just the provenance mapping, not just the documentation, but we are fighting busting of these archetypes that have been normalized and legitimized over the ages, right? Let's see where these archetypes end up getting legitimized. The whole idea that somebody can waltz into your civilization and take whatever they feel like. Look at Egypt, look at China, look at India. All of us talk about history in terms of thousands of years, perhaps more. A lot of the aggression that happens, unfortunately, and very rationally so, happens from much younger nations that have histories of 200, 400, 500, or 1,000 years. It is their only way, again, I'm talking about it from a deep psychological, subconscious point of view. It is if you're sitting in the US today, you have an innovative culture, you have the crispiest of French fries, you have, the grandest of houses, spaceships, what have you. The one thing you don't have today is a sense of history, is a sense of continuity, which is exactly why you tend to seek it or plunder it or buy it from wherever it exists. But is this just a piece? Are these objects just objects or something more? You look at deep ancient Mongolian culture, a lot of Northwest Africa as an example. The picture on your left is what's called a gyayang or a totem pole. And African tribes believe that that piece of wood has the collective memories and souls of every tribal ancestor that came and went before, right? That piece of wood or many pieces of wood are the only connection they believe. You could call it a matter of belief, a matter of faith, what have you, with their ancestors, with anyone that came before them, right? The picture on the right, which we're all familiar with, the Ganesha that Makaranji talked about, we all know what space it plays in our collective consciousness, in our collective faith, in a country like India. When these objects are taken away from their context, you're actually taking away every non-tangible aspect that came with the object, and that is where the problem lies. You're decontextualizing an object and making it a showpiece, which is multiple levels of an affront, right? Not just do you make it a showpiece, you sell us replicas, sometimes, cheap plastic replicas. I mean, this is insult over injury, where you take something that was ours, you forcefully display it in your museums. I mean, these were things that were made for certain communities with a certain objective in mind. Going back to Makaranji's questions that, hey, aren't they better taken care of elsewhere? The temperature controlled environment and security and what have you. And guess what? That's not what these objects were meant for. I mean, it's akin to Makarandji coming to me and saying, hey, Anurag, you're really not a great son. You don't spend enough time with your mother. You don't take her to the doctor often. You're not there for her. I'm more prosperous than you, so I'm going to kidnap your mother under the promise that I will take care of her. That's something that's not going to fly. It's also not going to fly because, for a lot of communities, these objects are as important as their mothers, their families, what have you. They have names, they have linkages with family histories. You will see a shroud of Turin is not a piece of cloth. I get it when Christopher Hitchens or whoever says that, hey, that's just a piece of cloth. But for many people, it is really a part of a person that is connected to them. And that's the context that gets lost when these faith objects move from the east to the west. Right. In terms of loss of context, and I'm going to be a little provocative here, borderline rude, but somebody's got to say it. What do you say, or how do you respond to a recurrent failure to resist an impulse to steal, right? To the psychological, perhaps sometimes the psychosomatic effects of the tension you feel when you're in a situation of aggression, not a victim, but even an aggressor, right? What do you talk about? Antisocial disorders, manic episodes that come along with being an aggressor. Fundamentally, when your weakness is the need to steal, right? The DSM-5 criteria. These are the DSM-5 criteria for kleptomania. We're talking about collective kleptomania here that existed in the past, perhaps in a much more diluted form today. Those of you who are interested in learning more about this, the American Psychiatric Association publishes these, revises them every 5 years. And it's a fascinating study on what it means at an individual level, which is how psychology or psychiatry is supposed to work, but also at a collective level, right? So the question is, what happens when cognitive dissonance is normalized? Now, I know I am engaging in some kind of fallacy here. Haters will say that, hey, listen, a nation or a foreign nation or a foreign government or a foreign people that insist on living with stolen heritage from the past isn't as extreme as people fawning over Hitler, let's say. Point taken on the sense of proportion. What we still cannot ignore is that collectively there is some element of cognitive dissonance that Western nations are having to deal with, where on one hand they say that, hey, listen, we're great guys, we're ethically and morally centered, we have an internal compass, etc., etc. We are a law-abiding society. But on the other hand, you're having to live with what your grandfather stole from mine. That cognitive dissonance, when amplified over thousands and millions of people over centuries, should lead to some kind of an imbalance or disequilibrium in society, which I see manifesting itself in many ways. Right? There's a lot of work done on the body, brain, and mind equilibrium. I'm not going to get into that. But when communities, when nations display collective signs of what would be considered a trait or a disease at an individual level, that is something really, really, really worrisome. And I think that's what has happened with the Western society normalizing the act of stealing what was never theirs. For those who are interested on these aspects, Dr. Andrew Huberman does a lot of work on this at an individual level and then at a groupthink level, but I'm not going to get into that. The point I'm making here is we as a nation and many nations, you have about a dozen nations that are now saying something which is very basic and very simple. It's a line which my dear friend Padma Awardee Ananda Shankar Jayant had given me, that history belongs to its geography. It's a very simple, logical, rational, powerful thought that we're only now seeing emerging. And I really do believe we've hit our Rosa Parks moment over the last 5 years or 10 years, where a bunch of nations are demanding that history belongs to its geography. A bunch of nations are now saying yes, it does, and a bunch of former colonizers are saying yes, it does. Right now, to deal with collective cognitive dissonance, to change the narrative, to change people's minds is not easy. It needs a lot of therapy. It needs a lot of correction of evaluative beliefs, correction of lenses with which people view the same action. right? When we set up India Pride project, the one thing we realized was there were a whole bunch of researchers before us that were doing the academic part of the job. So starting in the 70s, we've had researchers from India doing the documentation, the provenance mapping, and really, really robust work on proving that, hey, here was a murti, here was an object, let's prove that this was here, the UNESCO convention that Makaranji talked about, etc., etc., etc. There was a lot of effort on the left brain side for a good 40 years. However, history wasn't coming back to its geography. Why wasn't it coming back to its geography? Because there was no right brain effort that was involved. And that's where India Pride project came in, and that's what our objective was. And look, I'll be very honest, a lot of people who were doing the um, the technical work, the research work, etc., don't like us for that, which is, so they look at it as a research problem, not a results problem. They look at it as something to outrage on, not something to get outputs on. And that's, the research to results leap is really where IPP came in and said, hey, listen, we have to be about changing what is normal. We have to be about ending political polarization on this issue. We have to be about building acceptability, etc., etc. So, what did we do? A bunch of things. Our team in the UK, led by this amazing guy Pritesh Patel, walks into V&A, walks into British Museum, holds these little what do you call it, speech bubbles, and takes these pictures, especially of faith objects that have been stolen from India. What are we doing here? We are visualizing and animating the plight felt by these objects. For those of you who are in the UK, especially within the NRI or the Indian community, you remember this having gone crazy viral, right? And it helped build amazing amount of traction, especially in 43 constituencies where the South Asian diaspora was a huge voting bloc. The British Museum, shortly after this, the British Museum actually tweeted, this picture of the Vishnu, saying that, hey, this is, this is from India, etc., etc. Look what happens after that. Hundreds and thousands of responses, which are essentially calling out the lack of morality of the British Museum taking pride in something that was stolen. Right? Crazy amount. And might I tell you, after that day till today, the British Museum hasn't proudly tweeted about any faith objects they've taken from India. As Makaranji mentioned, I'm really proud about the fact that we have people across the political spectrum who support this even domestically within India. We have a whole bunch of people tweeting, writing to the British Museum, etc. And I'm highlighting this tweet, right? Even people that don't know how thieves is spelled is calling the British Museum thieves. And I think we have to be, if you've dealt with anybody that is dealing with disorder, intervention includes a stage where you call out what that disease is. And people who don't even know how thieves is spelled is calling out that disease, right? Because of the effort on the Parthenon marbles, with what's happening with Ghana, etc., etc., the British Museum had to come out with a statement which said not everything was looted. Now let that sink in. We're talking of not 192-year-old effort to take back the Parthenon marbles. And the British Museum had never felt the need to engage with anybody at all. But here we sit today with them actually issuing a statement, and let the weight of this sink in. Imagine what it takes for a former colony to say not everything was looted. Right? That's a huge milestone for all of us collectively.